Yeah, what's up, everyone? Welcome to, I don't remember which episode this is, a Kick and Base podcast. I always have to go back and check, but I think it's like episode 12. Um, Today, it's just me and our coach Sandor, and we're going to be talking all about rejection. So, as a producer and an artist and a DJ, you deal with a lot of rejection in the music industry. Everyone deals with it. It's not something that, beginners only deal with. At every skill level, at every wherever you are in the music industry, there's always some type of rejection, which is, when some other party basically says no to your music, to show opportunities, to whatever it is. And we're going to both talk about our experiences with dealing with rejection. We've both dealt with it a lot throughout our careers, and just some helpful tips for looking at it in a positive way, because be um, it can be very downing on you as a producer. So we want to make sure that when we get rejected on something, that it leads to a productive, healthy view on it. And yeah, so the first topic we're going to talk about is going to be rejection with your music. Sandra, what's the most obvious way a producer gets rejected with their music?
Yeah. Yeah, well, of course, it's going to be when you send your music to a label and they either don't reply or you just get a fat no. I think this happens to me all the time, sending music to labels that I was absolutely convinced that I was going to be signed to, or DJs that I thought would love my music. Like I've only had like one big release with Solo Toko, and the rest I'd say like 90% of my emails are like just rejections, and having to take that and turn it into a positive thing. I think it can easily be like you can be so deflated after years of working so hard and thinking that you're finally at that level, and then still getting a no and trying to figure out why that is and not let it be a bad thing. um I
I,
think just being critical, you know what I mean, and going from there.
Yeah, I think a big thing is also with rejection. The reason why a lot of times it can sting when you send music to labels and you get either a no or a no response, which oftentimes is like you know, uh, another way of saying no, is that we set really big expectations for ourselves. Especially, no one understands your growth as a producer more than yourself. So you see yourself go from level A, which, maybe you're a year or two into production, and you're just kind of finishing songs and like they don't sound great, but you're just like happy they're there. And then you go to, like, let's say level B, where really starting to sound a lot better. You've seen that growth, and so you kind of have that expectation. It's like, okay, I've improved from this starting point. Now I'm over here, where in reality you may not actually be there, but because you kind of you think you're there, when you do get that no from that label, it stings really bad. And I've had this happen countless times in my career, especially when I was really like hustling and sending demos out. I would say maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And this is like, I was trying to hit all those kind of, in my eyes at the time, not that they're not, but top tier labels. So, a big one for me was like Dirty Bird, Repopulate Mars. Um, you know, you have this goal of like, all right, I'm finally ready for that. And there's so many factors that go into signing a track that it can feel super personal when you get that rejection. But I think having good expectations and realistic expectations really helps with it. Because if you're convinced that this is going to get signed, it's not really a healthy mindset, I think, going into sending a demo.
Definitely. I think on that note as well, like what you picked up on is like for me and other people, how much work you've done, right? And you don't see how much work other DJs have done. They're like 10 hours in the studio every day. So there's like a part in your brain that's like, oh, I've done so much work. This has to be the amount of work that I've done to get to that level. And then it turns out that it's not sometimes, and you realize you've got to go further, and because there's no like set guideline, and you just don't know when you're at that level and when you're gonna like finally reach that goal, and you've got to be prepared
Exactly.
to
It's
expect it.
you're kind of stuck on your own in terms of like, and that's why a big thing I think that Kick and Base is so helpful is that it gives you a community that you can kind of like benchmark yourself. Not that there is like a competition in music in any ways, but you are not just like sitting alone with your tunes. You have other people's tunes that you can listen to. You can get feedback on your music. That's so important because, yeah, if you're sending it out in a vacuum, you could think your tunes are amazing, but some of the demos are at a much higher quality level. Maybe like the mix downs and the masters sound way louder. You know, another thing, especially with getting rejected from a music label, is oftentimes it could just be like not the right fit. So it has not, you know, I think this is something that people, when they deal with rejection, they, you know, this will come up a lot, is that it comes back as like a personal reflection of like either their self-worth or like their talent or their creativity, whatever it is that like you value in yourself as an artist. When you get that stamp no, you're like, oh, you know, you doubt all those things about yourself. But at the end of the day, when labels are signing music, there's so many variables, and it has nothing necessarily to do with like your value as an artist. It could be maybe that sound doesn't really fit the sound that they're going for, or you know, they're only looking to sign artists that have already reached, you know, a certain number of social media followers or something like that. These
Yeah.
things are real. It's a, you know, it is a business, it's an industry at the end of the day. So that's another important thing I've learned, is that, you know, just because it's not right for them at this point in time doesn't, you know, mean I'm a bad producer or anything
Yeah,
like that.
definitely. Because one thing I wanted to mention at some point was, you know, you got to be critical when you get a rejection, but at the same time, you don't want to take like the wrong messages from a rejection. Say like you send a demo to Solid Grooves and Repopulate Mars, and it's like a vocal tech house track or whatever, you're going to get like completely different reasons, if any, why it's not been accepted by that label. So I think you also need to make sure that when you are rejected, you know that it's not just because it's not the right fit, you know what I mean? Don't like beat yourself up for reasons when it could be a really good track. You got to make sure that it's being sent to the right place, because you could send the best track to Solid Grooves and it's just not right for them, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of it comes with like the preparation. And I think I don't know if we did a podcast episode specifically on sending demos out, but I definitely know we have some tutorials in the Discord on, you know, sending demos. But yeah, a lot of this happens before, you know, it sets you up a better success, but it also like helps set up your um, expectations. One story that I love was that when Calvin Harris, so he has this what's it called, lover generator? Is that, you know if that's
Yeah,
his
that's
alias?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, he did a tune with like Steve Lacy like right after the pandemic, and it came out on Defected. And I remember when the tune came out, he posted his original. So he sent demos to Defected in like the early 2000s or the 90s, and who is it? Simon Dunmore sent back like a handwritten note that was like, "Dear
Uh,
Mr. Harris,
all
like
that.
we appreciate you sending demos. You know, you have a lot of talent. These aren't like the right fit for us or whatever." But he had this letter still, and then he posted it when he, you know, it took Calvin Harris like 20 years to get undefected. He was like originally rejected as like a young producer just sending out demos, and I thought it was like so inspiring, because I was like, dude, he's like literally the goat of like dance music, and
Yeah.
you know, he's kind of showing, you know, his rejection and owning up to it. So it happens to everyone, especially with music. You know,
Yeah.
don't, you know, I'm trying to think what are like the key takeaways with dealing with rejection here. Set good expectations. I'm like OCD. I like to have like a list. Set good expectations. Don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Um, Also perseverance. We haven't talked about that really, but you know, don't give up either. Like a lot of times, and I'm sure you've had examples of this in your music career, but a lot of times it takes a lot of tracks to get a label interested. And I've seen this with other producers as well. Is that sometimes it's, you know, for when I got my first track signed to Dirty Bird, I sent them a bunch of demos before that, and it was no, 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 no. And if I stopped and it was like, oh, they don't like my sound, they're not interested in me, you know, I never would have got that first break that I was able to there. So
Yeah.
persevere, keep going, you know, improve.
Like, I agree with you completely. Like, I think it's important to like be confident in your music, but like not like overconfident. You know, don't take things for granted. Don't expect for it to be like signed for sure, because you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like for me now, like when I send a demo to a label, you know, if it gets signed, it's a nice surprise. Like, but that doesn't mean like not aim high. Like I think, you know, set yourself goals, but don't like expect something. And if you don't expect something and then it does happen, it's a great thing. And if it doesn't happen, you haven't been expecting it, so it doesn't matter, and you just keep on with the grind and you keep going on to the next tunes, you know?
You kind of have to love the process. And I think this also applies, especially with production or your music that you make is like there's so many areas that you can feel disappointed in with the release, right? So like let's say it does get signed, that's amazing. A label likes your song, they wants to put it out. Um, you know, I've realized for me as a producer, when I was a few years back, the goal was always just get the music signed. That's the win if I can get it signed. Now it's the metrics have changed. It's like, oh, I want this to go really high on Beatport. I want this to get this many streams. So you kind of have to, this never goes away no matter how big you grow as an artist. There's always new things that you get used to and then new expectations that you want to hit. So it's not just getting it signed. Like, a big thing is, and I see this a lot, is that especially with like social media and TikTok these days, is that a track may have some buzz around it. Maybe a big DJ played it out. Maybe you had a video that went viral on Instagram or TikTok. And then, you start to get this expectation that now it's going to be a hit or something like that, or, and I see this all the time with producers. And then, maybe the track comes out, it does okay, but they had this such a high expectation that it made them feel like the public rejected them, or the DJs didn't like the track, it didn't get number one on Beatport. So it applies to a
Yeah.
lot of things. It's not just getting it signed or not.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think you definitely need to have like that balance across like all parts of, your artistry and your brand. I think, like you said, it could be huge on TikTok or something, and then like it could not do as well as you think. And when something like that happens, what I try and do on so many different levels is like figure out like what the weakest part of whether it's a tune or my brand is, and then like strengthening that. And if you
Yeah.
like continually find out what the weakest part of whatever it is, and then you improve that, and then you go back and you figure out what the new weakest part is, and then you keep doing that and you keep doing that, and you're basically like leveling up everything in a balanced way, whether that's just on a macro or micro level, like your track, like your kick drum or something, or on a bigger level, like your brand, whether you had the right social media presence and stuff like that. You use rejection in the ways that you described that way as well, and try and
I,
improve things.
I think that's so important, is that like you have to like make something productive out of it. There has to be some follow up, whether it's like, all right, this label didn't like this track, and maybe they tell you why they didn't like it. It's like, even though that like sucks that they don't like it, that's the whole reason we do all this feedback in kick and bass, is that now you have something that you can like work on. Or sometimes you kind of have to do the research yourself. And I think this is a really great point you made, which is like, okay, maybe it's my brand or something else that wasn't pushing it to the next level. And I think that's a big thing as well, is like the people that really win are the ones that like don't take rejection and just get upset about it or get angry about it or get turned off by it. They like kind of love it in a way, because they learn something from getting rejected each time,
Yeah,
which is super
definitely.
important.
Like the way I try and think of it myself is if I do get rejected, I've just got to make my track so amazing that the next time, like, it's impossible for an A&R to say like no, like it's just got to be
Sounds
that
like
good.
a lofty expectation though. You won't be,
Also, yeah,
but it's
but
true.
I
You
know.
want to you want to aim high.
Yeah, exactly. But on that topic as well, with like feedback and A&Rs and that, I wanted to ask you what you thought of is it okay to like ask A&Rs for more information on why a track was rejected, or do you think that could like annoy the A&R because they get like so many emails, especially the top ones? Because I try and keep my emails as short and sweet as possible. Don't spam them with loads of emails. So I wonder, like, it could be important information, but at the same time, do you want to burn that
Yeah,
bridge? So
I think it's an interesting question for sure. I think there's not like a specific answer, like, oh, you should always be able to, get more. It kind of, I think it would one depend on like your relationship with the person. Obviously, the closer you are with someone, I feel like you should be totally comfortable in asking, what the feedback is of why something was rejected. But I've had times like especially recently where, you send a bunch of demos or a few demos or one, and they don't, it's not a right fit for them. That's like the most generic answer. Not a right fit. It just means
yeah,
that it's just a polite way of saying like we don't like the record. I think with tools like Trackstack, it's amazing because they make the demo listening process super easy to give some type of feedback, even if it's like a templated response, like, oh, the mix wasn't great, or this doesn't really fit my sound. But yeah, I think, people that are in the, what do they call them? Gatekeepers, like the people that are making the decisions. I think you do have a bit of an ethical obligation. I don't know, ethical obligation, but like for the culture and for the, the community to give some type of feedback to people.
Yeah.
So I think there's nothing wrong with asking for it, especially if like if you actually get a response back, like, the worst thing that could happen is either you just don't get a response, or, I don't think anyone would be like, no, if if they read it, they would probably either not respond or, yeah,
Yeah,
give you
I
a
agree.
reason.
Because like talking to A&Rs as well, I've seen so many screenshots on like Twitter where, someone's been rejected and then they'll send like a really salty response, like basically because they expected it so much, and then they're kind of shit talking the A&R and then just burning that bridge completely. And you really have to not take it personally, do you? And just kind of keep that like conversation with that AR like A&R positive, even if they do say no, because it's just so
It's
important.
it's also sometimes it's interesting because it's like, let's say you have already like kind of had a relationship with that person, like maybe you got your track signed, and so you know you feel as though you are in, let's say, with like that label or that um whatever it is, producer. you know Sometimes then you're still going to get the rejection of afterwards, and it's kind of like awkward almost, because you're like, oh, you signed my track before, but maybe not like this one
Yeah.
you don't like, and like it can feel like you're kind of like going back in progress or in time, because you're like, oh, my last track got signed but they didn't like any of these ones.
Yeah.
That's
I
just
think
another thing that it happens to all the producers. Like it's not, it's not
mm,
just you if that's happening to you.
yeah, and on a personal note as well, I've had tracks signed to some pretty big labels that now I send demos and like I don't even get a listen. So you really have to not take it personally, because like that can happen at any point. And just keep it positive. Yeah.
I think this is
Yeah.
a good transition into the next topic that we want to talk about, which is similar, but kind of like rejections as a DJ. Because there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of have that same feeling of rejection that you may get from when like a label says no, or you don't get into a Spotify playlist or whatever it is. Um, and one thing that I see, which is very common, is that obviously being a DJ in 2023 is extremely popular. There are lots of DJs out there, and there's lots of producers out there. And when labels do parties or host events at places, there's often this feeling that if I've released on a label, that like I deserve a slot at their party, or whatever it is. And this was something I struggled with a lot, I would say, before the pandemic, because I wasn't getting very many gigs, and I had this pressure of like, oh, I got to play these shows, I got to play these festivals, and if I release on these labels, I'll become part of the family and I'll get all these gigs and blah blah blah. And then, I was able to get some releases, and in my mind, I was like, yeah, I'm part of the team. And then I was like, wait, well, why am I not getting booked for all these parties and blah blah blah? And you can kind of feel like, oh, maybe I'm not cool enough, or I'm not good enough, or like just like frustrated, like what the fuck? Like I did the hard part, which is like getting the music signed. Like, why can't I be in the crew, kind of, so to speak? That's something that I dealt with personally, and you kind of have to, and this is something I want to talk about at the end, is just like mental health methods with dealing with like this rejection. But yeah, it took me a while to just like realize that nothing, kind of like we said before, like that expectation isn't always going to get met. There's a lot of other things that go on, and just having one release on a label doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get all these shows or whatever.
Yeah, it's about just building up that relationship with them and not expecting anything. I think that's something that people can pick up on as well, like the way that you message people, whether you're messaging them because you want something, you expect something, or you're just trying to be friendly, you want to build a relationship with that brand, you want to sign the music to them because you love that brand, you know what I mean? And like the similar thing has happened to me. Like I've been lucky enough to be resident DJ at one of the best clubs in my hometown, Brighton, for like the last 7 years now. And like at the beginning, when I was like fresh faced 19-year-old, I was getting like room free sets at like 9 p.m. when the flyer wasn't even said the club open to 10 p.m. right, which was
Mhm.
fine because like I was so new to it. I was just loved being behind the decks. But then like after a few years being, one of the only residents that was an actual artist releasing tunes, I was expecting some like bigger sets, better set times, especially for headliner shows that was like completely my music. And then it wasn't happening. And I think it was really important for me to like take that form of rejection and like not let my ego get in the way. you know, just like suck it up, carry on working really hard. And just like I mentioned before, like making my music so good enough that the club manager, like it was impossible for him to like not take me seriously anymore. Whereas there was like other residents that would just start, you know, smack talking the manager like behind their back, and it would eventually get back to them and stuff like that, because they were like, oh, the manager's making the wrong decisions. Like it should be me getting these sets, and having this ego and really taking the rejection in the wrong way. Whereas if you just focus on your own thing, you know, eventually it will happen if you just keep working. I think that's something that's always been quite comforting to me, that like if you just keep working and working, one day it will happen, no matter how many rejections you get, you know.
I think a big thing here, which is coming up, is like also like comparing yourself to others, because that you takes a lot of times people think that DJing and or being an artist is like a zero sum game, in the sense that like if someone else wins, it's like it levels out the pool in this way for you. Um, and that's something that I think all DJs struggle with. It's like a classic example is like, let's say, like exactly like you said, like you have a local club and there's a pool of DJs that can like open. Let's say your favorite artist is coming to town, you want to open. Why did this person get that slot, or why are they ahead of me on this slot? As opposed to me. I see this on Twitter all the time, especially the debate about like being an art, like being a producer and DJ versus just being a DJ. But yeah, I think like expectations are huge here as well. Like once you kind of go to the other side, you can see that you know, a lot of the decision making isn't has anything to do with you or your artistry. It's like purely like, oh, how many people can you get through the door, or personal favors. Like there's a lot of what we would call bullshit like that in the industry, but that's just kind of how things work.
Yeah.
But I think that the important thing, and this is what you touched upon, is just like not focusing on yourself and focusing on like the hard work that you put into it to get to the next level. And you kind of have to like love the grind of doing that versus just loving the result of like getting that slot, or having those people in front of you DJing. Because if that's all you want, or that's all you take pride in, or really enjoy, then you're kind of setting yourself up to failure. And it's not something that like you figure out immediately. It's not like you're gonna listen to this podcast and be like, oh, I changed my view on rejection, my ego's gone. Like everyone deals with an ego like that. But I think it's really important to just be aware of like how that could be affecting you and like your emotions on certain things, especially when
Yeah.
it comes to DJing.
Definitely, like you said, like everyone's going to have an ego, but it's a way that you can take those feelings and just not let them affect you. You know, of course, you're still going to like feel bad sometimes when something doesn't happen.
Yeah,
It's about not letting your reaction define you. And like you said, at the end of the day, like nobody else's progress or achievements are going to affect yours, right? You've just got to focus on yourself, and go from there, and not worry about other people, not constantly compare yourself. You know.
yeah, build your own lane for sure.
Mm.
Another thing with DJing, which I feel like is like a very kind of, it can feel very rejecting, is you're there in the sense to please the crowd. And that this is the fun part I think of DJing, but just like not having like songs go off, or like especially if it's like your own production. It's like, maybe you have the expectation that it's gonna destroy in this club, and then you get there and you're like, no. Um, this happens to me especially a lot. Is like I'm kind of gearing up. I'm doing a lot of like headline shows now, and like there's this pressure to fill the room, and have all these people there. Maybe I'm playing in like a bigger room, and I get like so much anxiety before the shows, because I'm just like, oh, what if no one's there? Like literally, like before EDC, I was like, what if no one's there? Like stupid like stuff. But there's this feeling that like maybe your worth is like how many people is in that room, or like what it looks like on a video on social media. And that can feel almost like you're rejecting yourself, kind of, as opposed to some like external factor where it's like, no, on
Yeah.
this track for the label, that's like very obvious. But I guess you can feel like you're being rejected in some way by the crowd or public. But I think all the things we said before apply to that as well. It's like
Yeah.
being determined.
Definitely. I think what you like talking about as well, it's a fine line between like believing in yourself and believing in yourself so much that you expect everything to happen. You know what I mean? You need
Yeah,
to like have confidence in yourself without you know, taking it to the extreme kind of thing, for sure.
yeah. All right. The last topic, I guess, and we kind of touched upon this, was rejection in terms of like networking, I guess, in the music industry. Um, we've talked a lot about like making the tunes, sending it out, kind of doing all the promotion of your music, and then, getting the right gigs, or not getting the right gigs, but the feeling of rejection when you're playing. Like, let's say you're playing a 9 p.m. slot, the door's not even open. Like, you can feel like we're there. But another area I would say is just like the music industry. It is like it can feel very like clicky in a sense, almost kind of like high school. You have like your different groups of people. And that can feel like very rejecting, but also like very isolating. And that's why I'm so big on having like online communities, because like when I started producing, I had my friends all over the world, people I'd never met before, but we were friends on Facebook, and we would send music to each other, and it would create this kind of camaraderie and community. But I feel like if you don't have that for yourself, it can be very isolating, and that like maybe you feel like you're not part of the group, so to speak. Have you ever experienced that where you're just like you feel like you're an outsider to like what's going on?
Yeah, definitely. When before I had like a residency at a club and seeing all these other parties going on and just wondering why I'm not on the lineup and stuff like that,
Yeah.
it can feel like that. But that's like you said, like with kick and bass, like I love the camaraderie in there and stuff like that. And it goes to such a global level in terms of gigs as well. For example, through kick and bass, like I was booked to play a headline gig
uh,
in Denmark,
I
and
saw that.
members, and it's just great things like that from the server, like being able to connect with all these people. And if you're not in a clique, that then you're wondering why not, just make your own clique, meet other people and just connect that way, and start your own group of friends. Like all the people that I send music to, for example, well, there's only pretty much one these days, and it's Hyder, the other coach on kick and bass, all because I met him online. And it's just building up that group of people. And if you don't have that group of people, just get online and find some cool people, because they're definitely out there.
That's the amazing thing about just like the internet in 2023, and especially like the production community. There is this like camaraderie. Like, I have so many stories like that. Like, Hyder taking me out in Ibiza and showing me around, like when my first time there. And, we've done that actually in a bunch of countries. Um, but I think it can feel, especially like in the music industry, that it's like, oh, I want to be friends with these people. I want to be in with this crew, with these parties. And that there's nothing wrong with like wanting that, but it kind of goes back to, expectations, and not like getting frustrated, because as a DJ, you kind of, after a while, you realize that a lot of people, especially as you get bigger as a DJ, you can't please everyone. You can't just like, you know, if you're a fan of Michael Beebe's music and Solid Grooves, it's like doesn't mean like if he plays your song or something that you're gonna have his phone number and you're gonna be best friends and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? So there is a big thing with like expectations there, but like finding your own kind of community and way to kind of get into the music industry. Um, I saw Graham Farmer, who does all of our social media expertise on Kick and Bass. I listened to his podcast with Will Clark, and yeah, he had a very similar story like that, where he kind of was like in the music industry for a while, but he wasn't really like seeing himself where he kind of like wanted in like certain groups, and he like got really discouraged. But then he kind of started his own thing, which is what he does now, which is what's it called, Data Transmission, which is like an online music publication. It's huge, and they do like so many different things now. So it's like a lot of times, if you feel like you don't fit into a group, like take that as motivation and go make something dope, where it's like that's going to be your new group, and everyone's going to want to be part of that. Well,
That's so true. I mean, specifically with Graham Farmer, like I met him at a festival and ended up hanging out with him and his partner for the whole weekend, becoming really good friends with him, and then became like part of Data Transmission. And he supported me over the years, and it's helped me level up my career all through a random chance of meeting him. So it's just getting out there and meeting these people that's going to help you. And it's like you said with Solid Grooves, they started their own party, like BB and Pausa, and started their own
yeah,
clique, like do the exact same thing. Like if you just get out there and have the passion to create a group of people, like it can happen.
and it can lead to that's yeah, that's the beautiful thing about a rejection. Like, is like I'm sure, especially if like you're kind of like you have a new sound that you want to push, and maybe it doesn't fit on labels. Like that's what births these like really cool labels and parties and ideas, is like, let's do something different. Maybe we don't fit into the mainstream of what's going on, and we're getting rejected. We're told, um, here's another great story is this guy MJ, he's a promoter in New York, and he was one of the first people to bring Elro, the party, to America. And he did it at the Brooklyn Mirage. And I think a lot of people were telling him like, they wanted to do a party that started at like 6 p.m. and went to like 4 a.m. Like usually the Brooklyn Mirage, it opens up at like 10. I remember people were like, "Oh, you're crazy! Like you're not going to be able to get people to come out early or blah blah blah." And I feel like if he just stuck with that rejection and then like didn't kind of believe in himself and the brand that he was pushing, you know, then nothing would have happened. And he was able to bring this brand to America, and it's like our crushes in America now. Tech house is like everywhere, but if you're like, oh, tech house doesn't work in these massive stages and blah blah blah, then it wouldn't have happened. So there is, like we said before, is like it's important to take the critical feedback from rejection when you can, but there's also time to say, fuck it, I believe in myself, I'm gonna push this, and go forward with it.
Yeah, it's a fine balance for sure. You've just got to be able to find your own path, but make sure that you're on the right lines,
Yeah.
Definitely. For sure. That's
All
awesome.
right. Well, I feel like I can't talk about rejection anymore. I feel like everything I know about
I know.
rejection has in the music industry has been said. So I want to thank everyone for listening to episode, I don't know, 11 or 12 of the Kick and Bass podcast. We've had Sandor here, who's been lovely, and talking all about different ways you get rejected in the music industry. The key takeaways are set good expectations, be persistent. I need a
Don't take
third.
it too personally.
Don't take it personally. That's a huge thing. Also, if you can find ways to kind of better your own mental health, whether that be in something like meditation, where you kind of are able to, help dissolve your ego a little bit, those kind of practices really help with just being an artist in the music industry, because there is like so much stress and anxiety and rejection, and taking it personally. Is that this is something I wanted to mention earlier, was that like, yeah, if you can find ways to kind of notice that and treat it in a way like that, really helps as an artist, and helps your productivity as well.
So,
All right,
for
guys,
sure.
anything else, Sandor? You good?
No, very good topics there for sure. I hope people, can take note from that and help them in the future.
For sure. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. We're out. Peace.